Okay. Hi, I'm Ian Tabor. This is my talk from an IVI in a box to a car in a box. First things first. Who am I? Well, my current day job is network security architect type role. However, you could say I'm the ultimate car hacker. I built this kit car 14 years ago now. Out of lots of parts of different Ford vehicles. It's a sort of labour of love. It's been upgraded numerous times. It's pretty quick. It only has 3 ECUs, 2 of which I have built. And the 2 I built actually communicate over CAN bus for data logging purposes. So on to my car hacking history. So previously found a vulnerability in a car I owned, a Citroen DS5, and I have previously presented those findings last year with my talk, Web Browsing from a Car, What's the Worst That Can Happen? Presented that at DC 4420, B-Sides London Rookie Track, and also the DEF CON Car Hacking Village itself last year. At the end of last year, I was lucky enough to be one of 12 car hackers invited to the Bug Crowd live Bug Bash in Louisville with a actual vendor who let us play with their cars. I can't actually go into any more details than that because we're not allowed, but that's quite interesting. So on to the actual vulnerability I found. Brief history. 2015, I bought this vehicle, DS5, 1955 limited edition. Had all the bells and whistles, all the toys, including a 7-inch touchscreen, which you could surf the internet from as long as you tethered through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, which is great. However, the problem was if you actually were on the same Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, you could telnet back to the vehicle, get into the head unit without any authentication and find out your GPS and telephone history, including all your contacts, etc., etc. Nice and secure. I then raised that issue with the vendor in question. They then came back and said it's up to the users to secure their own Wi-Fi, but in future models we'll probably just kill the Wi-Fi version anyway because we don't see it as a requirement. So at the time I sold the vehicle, but I thought, can I actually get any further than just telnetting onto the head unit? Was there any way of going from the Wi-Fi IP network onto the CAN bus? So I went and purchased a head unit from a scrapyard from a DS3 from the same year. Had all the same setup, allegedly, with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. You could surf the internet on it. And when I purchased it, the man in the scrapyard said, you'll never get that working without the rest of the car. So challenge accepted. As you can see on the picture here, there is all the other parts of the rest of the car you need to get it working, including the body control module here, instrument cluster, the steering controls, ignition key. You don't actually need the ECU, but I did have it at the time. So that was what was required to actually get the head unit working out of the vehicle. But the challenge was, could I get it working without the rest of the car? So I did a bit of CAN bus sniffing. Managed to sniff the correct messages, replay them, found out that there was 5 messages required, created a little sketch on an Arduino with the relevant CAN bus transceiver, and created a little lone IVI in a box. I have taken this to a few conferences. Other people have expressed interest in trying to hack this and see what they can do with their skills, but because of time constraints and things, they haven't actually managed to do that. But things will happen soon. So as I had quite a large proportion of the components from within a vehicle, I thought I'd make a car on a bench. This is Grimm's 3PO, which is based on, I believe, a 2012 Ford Focus, and they've got minimal wiring between the modules, and basically all the modules sit there dumb and you can interact with them, but the car doesn't actually work as a car. So there's no engine running, etc., etc. So from then on, end of last year, I went to the Bug Bash and myself, Spectres and RQU found a P1 vulnerability and managed to share between us a 5-figure payout. So with that money that I wasn't expecting, I decided to, instead of having a car on a bench, I'd make a car in a box. The thought being that this car in a box could be taken to security conferences to get other people into car hacking without the risk of potentially them bricking their own car. If you've ever done car hacking, sitting outside the front of your house with a bright laptop, sniffing CAN messages, get some very strange looks from neighbours. And if you're anything like me, last time I did it on my daily driver, I managed to brick the gearbox, and the car didn't know where the gearbox was. Luckily, I managed to get it back, but that would have been a very difficult conversation when it comes to getting the car back on the road. So car hacking is a bit like lockpicking. Only do it to something you don't rely on, and also only do it to your thing. So with the thought of the car in the box, I then had to purchase all these other components shown here to actually have the rest of the vehicle. So there's a steering rack ECU, main fuse box, ABS ECU, pedal, throttle body, the rest of the components. Some of the rest of these components already had. I also had to buy quite a lot of sensors so that I could work out how those sensors work and how I could emulate those sensors. And this all costs money. I will come to the costs in the end. But before you can work out how to emulate sensors, you need to work out how the wiring works. This here is the wiring diagram for my kit car's main ECU. There is a DB37 connector, of which 15 wires are connected, 6 of those are ground. That car uses it's a 4-cylinder wasted spark coil pack, batch injection with 2 pairs of 2 injectors, single O2 sensor, a couple of other sensors for throttle position, air intake, coolant temperature, etc., etc. And there's not really much to it. When it comes to the car that I had the parts from, a Peugeot 208, this is one of the wiring diagrams. This is actually the wiring diagram for the ECU. This has 2 53-pin connectors and 1 32-pin connector. So that's potentially 138 pins. The reason why it's more complicated is because it's 3-cylinder sequential injection, coil on plug, dual O2 sensor, dual variable valve timing with dual cam sensors, and then it's got all the rest of the relevant sensors you would expect it to have, throttle position sensor, electronic pedal, manifold air pressure. So quite a lot of these sensors I had to then emulate. And there are also lots of other wiring diagrams I had to get hold of to work out how to get things like lights working, because there was no way in the world I was going to put the light clusters in the vehicle. But the hardest, well, one of the hardest ones to actually emulate is the the engine thinking it's rotating. To do this, you have to know how the crank and the cam signals work. Peugeots, in general, actually use what is known as 60-1 crank sensor, and they use 2 cam sensors, which are located at the right-hand end of the 2 camshafts here, and you have to work out what that signal is to be able to emulate it. You also have to remember that the crank turns twice for every full rotation of a camshaft. Found a bit of software on the internet called ArduStim, which uses an Arduino and some other transistors to generate these waveforms to fool the ECU into thinking it's working. There is also a potentiometer on there so that you can vary the speed of the engine. And once this was all built and plugged in, it actually thought the engine was running. There are some other sensors that require waveform type things to work correctly, one of which is the O2 sensor. There is a couple of 555 timers in there, which are used for generating the relevant O2 sensor information. So it detects that it's either lean or rich or in a sort of waveform. So on to the next slide. Here is the details of the actual CAN networks on the vehicle itself, or the car in the box. On the left-hand side, we have the red and orange, which is your normal OBD2 port running at 500 kilobits per second. You've got the body control module, which controls things like your lights, some of the switches on the dashboard, etc. You've got the ABS ESP module, the power steering, and your engine ECU. Attached to the body control module on top of that is the two low-speed CAN buses shown here in yellow and green and two shades of blue. The yellow and green one itself has the steering control ECU, where your indicator stalks and your lighting switches, etc. are. There's also the airbag ECU, which is not available in the car in the box, because there was no way I was putting a Class 1 explosive in the back of my car and taking it around to conferences to let other people to try and set off said car, Class 1 explosives at the conference, because it's a bit dodgy, and airbag ECUs are actually very expensive to purchase themselves. Onto the second of the low-speed CAN buses, there is the one that has the instrument cluster, the matrix within the instrument cluster, which shows you things like speed, miles per gallon, and GPS information, and finally the IVI itself. There is a fourth high-speed CAN bus on the car in the box, but that only goes between the IVI and the screen of the IVI, and that is for the touch screen to actually work. So now we're going on to the actual car in the box. This is the car in the box. There's the little box, which is the IVI in the box, and the big box, which is the car in the box. It's going to be known as PDO, P indicating Peugeot, DO indicating 208 in hex, because that's the vehicle it's from. There's the IVI open, as you've seen before, and there are the two parts of the car in the box. Let me just go through some of the things on the screen. On the left-hand corner here is a little blue box, which is the RGStim, which is simulating the crank and cam waveforms. There is a potentiometer on there, which allows you to modify the speed of the engine. If you look on the right-hand side, there is the rev counter on the left-hand side of the cluster. Looks like it's going about 3,000 RPM at the moment. That can be adjusted anything from 0 up to 8,000 RPM. However, the clock stopped at 7. Other indicators on here. There's some LEDs for the injectors, LEDs for the coil. There's the potentiometer for the water temperature. You've got the throttle body and the pedal, which they do work. So if you push down on the pedal, the throttle body will open. Depending on the speed of the engine, how far that throttle body will open. There are, as you can see, there is the O2 simulator. All you can see in that is a flashing LED at a very low rate, but it seems to fool the ECU itself into thinking the O2 simulator is working, or the O2 sensor is working. It still does throw an error message up on the dashboard for the heater circuit, but to fix that, I need to put in some very large resistors to make it think that the actual heaters are actually there. But they will waste a lot of electricity and get very hot very quickly, because they're normally turned on all the time. But as you can see along the bottom there, you've got the steering rack, main fuse box, body control module, lighting board here on the left-hand side, which allows you to see what the lights are doing. On the right-hand side, you have the main power supply, steering switches, instrument cluster, other switches, etc. And your ignition key. You do actually have to turn the ignition key to get the thing to turn on. You then have to tweak the revs to actually get it up above a certain value, otherwise it turns itself